We heard your president speak in a historic address in the UK House of Commons yesterday, and he received a standing ovation. If you read the front pages of our newspapers today, his words are being lauded and celebrated. But after that speech, does he feel he got the action from the UK to back up the standing ovation and all the plaudits?
Well, first of all, we are grateful to our UK allies and friends, of course. It's only been a day, so it's hard to say, but I think we're really fighting hard for a no-fly zone, as everyone knows. We have to protect our skies in order to protect our people. Now, there is a lot of hesitancy on the part of the West to do that. We understand this, but one way or another, they have to give us the military facilities to implement a no-fly zone, at least by ourselves. We have to prevent the Russians from being able to bomb our cities, to kill our civilians. They're shooting indiscriminately at our population, and so this has to stop.
How vital is NATO members and the West supplying air support to Ukraine? Because we hear about the Russian troops advancing on the capital as we speak. We hear about the bombing of Mariupol. We've just talked about a children's hospital that's been completely destroyed today. How vital is air support?
Air support is extremely vital. Without air support, the Russian advance on the ground comes to a halt. It's virtually impossible or much harder to implement for them. So air support is incredibly important, and that's what we're fighting for, essentially. The Russians so far haven't been able to capture any major cities of symbolic value, of course, Kiev, but Mariupol is in real danger. It's a city in the south, in the eastern part. If they will be able to capture that city, God forbid, they will have a direct route to the rest of Russia through Ukraine and to Crimea. That will be a huge symbolic, hugely important symbolic issue for them, and we can't let that happen.
What is the president's response to the fact that NATO members say we can't give you anything that would be seen as an offensive weapon? Everything we give you has to be defensive, because if we do, it is then bringing NATO into direct conflict with Russia. What is his response to that?
Well, I think his response, as any response on the part of the Ukrainian people right now, would be to say, look, there already is a full-scale war in the middle of Europe. There's already thousands of people dead and dying as we speak. What else needs to happen for the West to realize that this is a crisis or a war that's not just going to go away without something materially changing? That sooner or later, the West will have to live up to the fact that it will have to confront this regime, the Russian regime. It's not going to disappear by itself. So I would say the sooner the West realizes this, the better for everyone and the less costly it is for everyone.
Can you give me an idea of what life is like for the president of Ukraine at the moment? He has been very vocal, saying that he is not leaving the capital. He's posted videos on social media showing the effects of the war on the city of Kyiv. He's given addresses from his presidential office. Talk to me about a day in the life of Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the moment.
Well, of course, I can't go into the details here, but everyone is in Ukraine. Of course, we're standing up to the fight. We're going to stand our ground and defend our country, defend our cities. So there's no question about that. But of course, it's not easy. It's a serious, challenge. It's a crisis of our life, of our lifetime. It's a full-scale war. So of course, it's not easy.
Yeah, I understand that you do have to be careful. And of course, the president does have his security team around him. But we do hear about him being targeted several times already. How secure is he?
So we believe, and we have grounds to be confident that he's very secure. I mean, there have been attempts, as everyone knows by now, on his life. We have been able to defeat those attempts, if you want, to basically disarm all these groups and liquidate them. So I don't think there is a serious chance of them having any success. But the situation speaks for itself. I mean, there are these things happening. There's a war, and there's obviously constantly an attempt on his life.
Mr. Rodnyanksy, we've just heard from your president on social media. I just want to read viewers what he had to say within the last few moments. He's tweeted this. It's about that bombing we were talking about in Mariupol, targeting a hospital. He said there's been a direct strike of Russian troops at the maternity hospital. People, children are under the wreckage. An atrocity. How much longer will the world be an accomplice ignoring terror. Close the sky right now. These are the words of the Ukrainian president. He goes on to say, stop the killings. You have power, but you seem to be losing humanity. That gives us an idea, doesn't it, of just how desperate the situation is. And for all the Western leaders applauding Volodymyr Zelensky's bravery and his strong words about his country, again, it doesn't sound like he feels like he's getting enough.
That's right, and that's what I've been saying just now in this conversation. All of Ukraine believes that we're not getting enough. I mean, what else needs to happen for the West to realize that this is a conflict that they will be engaged in more directly anyway? You will have to, confront this regime one way or another. And the sooner the West realizes this, the better, the less costly it's going to be, the less lives will be lost. And of course, we're looking at on the destruction in our country, at the lives being lost in our country. And we're wondering, why is everybody just sitting back?
Yeah, sitting back is a good way of putting it, in terms of people are saying the West are helping in terms of humanitarian aid, military support where it can, in terms of being defensive. But do you feel that NATO and the West has been a step behind here, and now is the time to look further ahead? Because if Ukraine falls, what next? Is it the Baltics, NATO member states?
That's exactly right. So concretely, we need full-scale, most advanced air defense systems. So we need high to medium air defense systems. We need some way to shoot down their cruise missiles, their medium-range ballistic missiles. Those are giving us a hard time, as you can see. I mean, they're killing innocent civilians, bombing indiscriminately, or maybe on purpose, as we know that's their war methods sometimes. So we have to do something against that. And you are right, there seems to be a step behind when it comes to NATO or our Western partners to give us that military capability.
Diplomatic efforts are still continuing. Every day here on Sky News, we talk about different Western leaders meeting in different Western countries, holding news conferences. We have the Foreign Secretary of the UK meeting her US counterpart later. We'll be hearing from them. These diplomatic efforts continue. And the West still seems to have faith in those kind of efforts, in turning the tide in this war and bringing a halt to President Putin's action. Do you have any faith in diplomacy at this point?
So this is what I've also been saying repeatedly. I think these assumptions are a bit naive. At this point, the Russian regime has really revealed its true nature. Before this escalation, before this war had started, there were doubts about the true nature of the Russian regime. You could have some disagreement about whether you should arm Ukraine or not, because if you armed Ukraine, maybe you would have escalated the crisis. But now, after the fact, when we saw the real nature, the real face of this regime, we can understand that it's not going to go away by itself. It's not really interested in dialogue. It's been exploiting the transparency and the honesty of the West throughout the whole process. It's been lying across all these years at every single step. We heard this in Crimea. There was no Russian troops in Crimea, and then the next day there were Russian troops in Crimea. Just before this war started, we also heard that there was just a military exercise, and on 20th of February, all the troops were going to return home. They never returned home, and then you had a real invasion. So how can you trust this side? How can you really seek dialogue at this stage? You're not dealing with a regular democratic country that you can rely on in terms of the promises that it's making. Here, you evidently cannot rely on what they're saying. So the approach has changed.
The approach does seem to be from the West, targeted at sanctions, at squeezing Russia's economy. We've been hearing about banning Russian oil. We've been talking about them being taken out of key banking systems and big companies pulling out of Russia and really hitting their economy. That takes a while to take effect. Does Ukraine have that time?
Well, that's the battle we're fighting, essentially. On the one hand, we need full military support, and our military has done wonders already. Nobody expected us to hold up like this for 2 weeks, with basically the Russian side being under pressure and not being able to have any strategic success so far. So that's number one. We need full military support, and we've spoken about that just now. The second part is to make sure that economically Russia comes under serious pressure such that it cannot finance this war anymore, unfortunately. I mean, I hate to say this, that there's nothing, in the long run, we want peace and stability with with Russia, right? I mean, they're not going to go away. But at this moment, we have to put maximum pressure on them economically, such that they do not have the resources eventually to continue killing our people and to wage this war. So that means tough sanctions, tough economic general sanctions, not just targeted individual sanctions. And the quicker, the better.
And can we just have a final question about what your president has described as the humanitarian catastrophe that is facing Ukraine right now? So much has been pledged by the West in terms of humanitarian aid. Now, we're looking at the difficulties of refugees leaving Ukraine, these humanitarian corridors and ceasefires being breached regularly. How easy is it for all this humanitarian aid to get to where it needs, to cities like Kiev, to Mariupol, that are surrounded by Russian troops? We hear about people being just days away from completely running out of food and water.
Well, you're addressing an issue that's just been completely impossible for me, for me personally, and for all of us here to comprehend. I mean, the Russian side seems to be sabotaging all these corridors, all the humanitarian aid. I mean, we've seen this as part of their methods in other conflicts, in Syria, for example, but we don't have a clear understanding of why they're doing it. I mean, they're bombing our cities, probably with some perfidious objective in mind, to just scare the population into submitting or whatever. But we have no understanding why they're killing civilians fleeing through these corridors, for example. There's been indiscriminate shooting at civilians with their luggage and children just being killed on the spot. And there is no explanation for that. I mean, we can't fathom what the explanation is, except that this war that the Russian regime has been waging has unleashed all of its viciousness, all of the viciousness that's been building up in that society, in that army over the years. And now it's being unleashed upon us. I mean, it's just as tragic as it can get. And I don't really have a response to that.